with the leader of the Marquez project and committers, discussing the state of the project, the roadmap.
Yeah, and I think in particular, we wanted to talk about the recent developments in the OpenLineage v2 specification. So there's been a lot of work. I think yesterday we had the meetup in New York for OpenLineage, and Julian Ledem, who's the leader of the OpenLineage project, presented on the v2 specification and kind of where we are with the discussions. And I did have a chance to look over the docs, and I think we wanted just an open discussion on what that would mean for Marquez and some of the changes required on the back end. Yeah. So in order to do that, I think what I wanted to do was, well, and maybe go over the individual docs that are made available. And I don't think we've slacked them to the community or made them aware in the Marquez community about where they're located, or just I think we should probably start advocating for more feedback, because this is going to be work that will have to be planned out and aligned with the release of OpenLineage v2. Now, with that, maybe we just turn on the music, because I do need to set up a little bit, and maybe while I'm setting up, we could do some quick intros. Yeah.
All right. I'm Michael Robinson. I'm on the community team at Astronomer and coordinate these meetings. Also contribute to the projects. And to my left.
Hi, I'm Harel. I'm engineering manager at Astronomer, focused on data observability and developer experience. Also kind of working on Marquez as part of my role here, but also as part of the community.
Hi, I'm Peter. I'm part of the community and a committer. I work here at Astronomer. I'm visiting New York today with Willy, and I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and as Michael mentioned in the start of the call, I'm Willy. I'm the co-creator and project lead for Marquez, and I've been working out of San Francisco, which is currently New York, for the OpenLineage meetup, and yeah, I think I'm ready. Okay. And you know, it's funny, Michael, you and you as well, Harel, also have a lot of really good context on the discussions that have been happening, and with the different teams and other projects that are interested in OpenLineage. You have a lot of context on the feedback that we received. There was two key things I think that were proposed in the doc. One was a backwards compatible change, and one was a breaking change for OpenLineage. So when we took the next step to evolve the spec, we wanted it to be a breaking change or something that was backwards compatible. And the context is in this doc. I think the backwards compatibility, if we look at the solutions, or that's not linked correctly. Oh, okay. Now, the main thing here is that if we just forget about the details, it's like, why would we want to be backwards compatible? I think the discussion came up as, okay, we're still it's still an early specification, so there have been deep integrations with Airflow, and there are some companies that we've been talking to that use Marquez, but also the OpenLineage integrations, and how much effort for them would it be to migrate to V2, especially the amount of time and team effort they've invested. So that right away is like, we asked them, what would you think if it was a breaking change? They're like, well, that would mean we would stay on V1 for a while. So as you talk to different teams and gotten feedback, that's kind of been the consensus. Do you want to add anything to that, or just customer, or just feedback around that? Okay. Now the reason for a V2, I mean, it has been discussed. I mean, one, there was this concept that has been, I guess, coined, is just the static lineage, and Marquez has always been focused on the run specifically. So when a job runs, you're going to extract the inputs and outputs and manage the lineage graph on the back end as events are coming in from OpenLineage. But what we're also seeing is that a job, I mean, a job itself may not be in the running state. It will run, but you still want those relationships to be made available in the lineage graph, even though there might not be a running state or a complete state. Now that there's a lot of logic that's, well, not a lot, but a lot of what Marquez is doing on the back end is when you have a run and it's completed, we create a job version. We version the output data set. So there is logic there that I think we need to consider when we look at static lineage. So now you don't have that run. So what additional work will we need to do on the back end to make static lineage work? But so there, personally, I have not given a lot of feedback on the doc itself, but I have taken a look at what has been proposed. And with Julian, he did walk through the plan about what things would be made optional. I think he talked about if we go to this jobless run event. So run events usually contain a job. And in some cases, though, the run, you might not have job details within the run event. So he had a really good diagram yesterday. I should have asked him to share those. But the main thing, the job entity represented in the run event would no longer be there. So you would not have a job name, but maybe there would be facets associated with the job itself. And let me think. So the use cases, this is a pretty good example of where we sat down with Snowflake and they don't necessarily have a job, but they have query logs. So query logs is a very good example of, yeah, there's something that runs in the background, but a job is just there to facilitate the query. So the query log is a good way to say, you know what, there was a run, but there's no job details, but we do know the inputs and outputs, or in this case, the tables that were touched as part of that query. So that will give more flexibility in being able to capture lineage details for cases that jobs don't exist. Now that is kind of weird because Marquez does need a job and it needs to associate runs with a job. So I think that's, just thinking about that would introduce more flexibility in the data model. So it's like, well, does Marquez then just default to some dummy job name so we could associate runs? I've also thought about how much of the spec could be driving the Marquez data model. I know there's a lot of great development being worked on in OpenLineage, but does Marquez model, which was very opinionated with APIs in the model itself, is it now loosening up in order to adopt the standard? So that's just a journey that the project has been on. I don't know if anyone has thoughts on that. But at the same time, the standard is helping with adoption, and I think further use cases that Marquez could not have, I think, foreseen unless we adopted the standard, or the standard came out of Marquez. But maybe that's just an open question for those that are here. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a natural expansion of the model where you don't always have these discrete entities running SQL or running code and using inputs and outputs. So a lot of these things can be ephemeral, and that's kind of a lot of what we're trying to address here. We have a lot of one-time instances, and we want to create lineage for those events in the Marquez model and facilitate that kind of journey and metadata collection. I think it makes a lot of sense.
And Peter, one thing that you mentioned at the OpenLineage meetup last night was that this spec change could have some implications for the UI and the user experience. So what do you think we need to consider as far as that goes?
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge because what will, I think, be generated out of this will be a lot of these very small graphs, like you have inputs, you have an entity, whatever we're gonna call that, a jobless entity. And its outputs, but you'll be generating a lot of that kind of, small contained lineage, and I think the UI is not really constructed exactly around that case, so we'll have to probably think about how that exists, how we can maybe aggregate kind of the same jobless entities together, and have some heuristic based upon that. Yeah, I think it's open for discussion, and I think a little unclear and murky at this point.
Yeah, what will be the current, like
Yeah.
layout in this case, like a
So
bunch
my
of single node
expectation is
graphs?
we have a representation, some new representation of the jobless entity, and then inputs and outputs, and those data sets will be the same, and that's what it will look like. I don't know if we would kind of funnel them into the jobs API and the job versions. Maybe we would, maybe we would have one job and only one job version ever for that job, like that. But that's kind of what I would think the current experience would be out of the box.
Yeah, which actually,
Which is not inaccurate, but.
yeah, I think it's sort of not a direct, it's related. So talking about job versions, dataset versions, Marquez can be an API that you just query job versions, and it's always like you query the latest. I know right now we query jobs and datasets, but it doesn't have to be that way. If you look at the model, here, you can see that we have datasets and jobs. So the jobs table has kind of expanded quite a bit, and also the dataset table, but the versions themselves are just sort of a small extension. So the API can just query datasets and job versions, and in that case, like no matter what, I think if you look at if we go back here and you see the extension, it's going to now be where job facets may be optional. The job ID is definitely not going to be part of that, part of the event, but the facets themselves. So I don't see, we still have to keep the contract in the model, but I think in the Marquez model, but we have to figure out a way to, generate a job name or an ID that makes sense. Because I think it's too big of a change personally if we just kind of say there's no job.
Have a UID or something, right?
Yeah, I think it could be some construction of that. We have the run information, so maybe we just based it off the run information that we get.
Yeah. Do we think this is going to be the first case for this? We'll be sniffing out of something like DB logs like that, where we have some like timestamps, something like that available to us to, coerce something into a job name.
I think so. We could look at, the closest thing or the best example we have is Snowflake. So in Snowflake Labs, they do have a repo. Let's see if I Snowflake Labs and then just maybe OpenLineage. If I just type in that. Okay, access history. Okay, so at least we could start here and what that would look like. This is a real world example on an adapter that's querying the historical query logs, and we could funnel that information into Marquez and see what we could do to generate a job name that would be consistent across the different cases where job information doesn't exist. So, so that's what keeps me up at night. And let's see what else does. Anything else in this doc that I think is important? I could go and I think that covered the main thing. I think the initial thing here you see is the job ID is required plus facets, but now the job isn't required, but the facets might be. Yeah.
What will happen from like a Marquez backend implementation perspective when new types of events they're not breaking backwards compatibility, but new types of events kind of start showing up to the Marquez web server?
Well, we would not, the way the events come in, we do map them to an object on the back end. So it would break. Like it was like we can't serialize this event, even though we view it as an OpenLineage event. So there would be work to support the additional types. And hopefully that could be something that, OpenLineage does have server-side models. That would make the integration a lot easier so we don't maintain them. It would be nice if we there's on the roadmap, it was, we did plan to use the OpenLineage provided server models, which are a lot more flexible, but keep the initial high-level required fields. We're kind of managing our own, which is not ideal. There was reasons for that, mainly because we did want to remove the models and then break anyone else who was using the models that Marquez defined. But yeah, I think a nice step would be have the server models that are available for OpenLineage, make those objects available so we can then use them to handle the different types that are coming in. Yeah, but and again, we would have to handle them if it's a data set type. I think this one here, is this one saying which one the types are?
I think it's down.
Yeah, extension. Right, okay, perfect, yeah. So the first case, the run event, we could handle that. When it comes to the dataset event, that's also very simple to handle. What I mean by that is, I always point this out. Let's see. Marquez always had a path to create a data set, right? So, we're kind of going full circle where Marquez had this static lineage. At the time, it was just lineage, where you could register data sets, register the job. And then behind the scenes, Marquez would create this default new state for a job that hasn't run yet. And then the transitions happened. But what the feedback was, this is a lot of work to make all these individual calls. And it would be nice if everything was provided in the payload, which is the discussions around OpenLineage came about. And then we're like, okay, let's do that. Let's define everything that's specific to a run, including the job and inputs and outputs, and make a single call. But as we're seeing from the feedback from the community, it's like, well, I don't have a run. I just want to register static lineage. And then we're kind of back to where we are with Marquez. But I think it was a great evolution of what we saw that the community needed. And Marquez, even though it had an endpoint, the logic is still there to register data sets. And everything else in terms of retrieving, deleting, that remains the same. But this create, we deprecated but never deleted the endpoint until the data set event was made available. So, and then same thing for job. You can see we create, but I think we can remove. We don't need to remove that. Or I'm sorry, it's deprecated just like data sets, but now you have it for jobs, right? Yeah, here's the job event. I think that's just an example, but I wanted to go here. So now we have a job event, which is great.
How do you see the migration path moving forward where I have to keep processing OpenLineage V1 events and open up additional channel for V2 events as well?
Yeah, I would imagine it's a union. So the API, the API, I don't have an example, but in the end, it's a lineage event. And so the endpoint would handle any of those types. Yeah. So it'd be a union of all of them.
So we would have some kind of backwards compatibility with V1 events into Marquez and the process.
And what's funny is that it's not. I mean, what we're doing is this is kind of the one thing I noticed is, do we have the types, the event type? Let me actually go to Marquez. So I'll just go to the C data. That's the wrong one. Yeah, okay, thank you. So this is where it gets a little interesting because the event type is start, but so we ended up overloading the event type where we would say that it's a start event type that's a run. So the payload was always a run specific. So it's like, what type of run event is this? It's a start, fail, and so forth. So I would imagine this is where a lot of the backwards, we would have to extend it. So it would be a data set type, event type, it'd be a job type. And then what do we do with the start? Because now it seems kind of weird, it's out of place. Do we do run underscore start? And still support start, but make it a bit more cohesive where you contextualize the type of event. So that could be discussed in the doc. But for us, it's just like any other API call, we're ingesting events. There's different types, and this doesn't change. The run, if it's a start run event, everything remains the same in terms of the contract. It's just you have additional event types, which naturally happens when you see more usage and you see more use cases in the wild. Although I don't know what that means for the front end. I guess, but for the most part, that's the front end is agnostic to what I wanted to show. If we go localhost, is it running? Yeah. I know C data 1972, but yeah. So I mean, the UI very much depends on the API calls, the query API calls that you see in the OpenAPI spec. So that none of that changes. So if you were wondering, well, do the calls change in any way if I list jobs or retrieve version information? None of that changes. This is mostly just ingestion. And in terms of the lineage, it's the last thing.
That's
There it is. Like getting a lineage graph. There's a proposal on run level lineage. Like, do we then think about the API call being static lineage versus run level lineage? That would be the only thing that we might have to think about in the lineage graph. Because it's not really run aware, the lineage call. So if I go to the Marquez repo, or not this one, this one. Pavel, he wrote a proposal on run level lineage. So with the introduction of OpenLineage v2, I think the API itself might need to essentially do a little split on like, I want static lineage, which is going to be quicker to retrieve versus a run level, because now we're looking at details specific to the run. And if you even look at the types of nodes, they also look different. So here you have a run lineage graph node, which allows you to query at the run level, which is a bit more complex query to run. But you don't. A lot of the customers, or even at Astronomer, they're just focused on the static lineage, and we can return that far quicker than querying all the runs and understanding the information at a point in time for a run and building out that graph. So I think one's going to be more expensive than another, but at least it's two paths that you can take to access lineage. And even see one last thing here is like the nodes also have the version. So again, if you want that level of detail, you can get it. And the fact that OpenLineage is evolving to support static lineage also will be an improvement on Marquez backend on how we retrieve lineage. Anyways, I think that's kind of what I wanted to go over, just a more in-depth understanding on what the spec will eventually. I know Julian actually, so before I go any further, I know Julian is working on going from a doc to a proposal. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think Julian and Mache.
Okay. But anyone else have comments on that? I I was thinking the model itself, you could see here. I mean, we're gonna make sure I have this link updated. But the model itself doesn't change. It's really the logic on how some of these tables get metadata stored in them.
Yeah. And this allows us to update things like data set quality metrics, not at runtime, which is, I think, something really useful for people as they do that. Because often that doesn't happen at runtime.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, that might give us the ability, so a few releases ago, we've optimized the lineage call by adding individual facet tables. Let's see if did I add it for? Oh, I thought I did. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, here. So these facet tables are, they were initially part of the lineage events table, and now I don't have the links here, links to the right tables, but you have data set and job and run facets. We can then start thinking about maybe creating these views or additional tables for data quality. So this allows us to, as the facets come in, to maybe have more specialized tables, which would be great. So as the use cases where it's just static lineage, can we also look at different ways to query and build out more interesting information about the dataset nodes and what we display? And data quality is a pretty good example of that. But anyways, I think that was my brain dump.
Thanks for walking us through it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, maybe after this call, we Slack the community and let them know about these 3 docs. What are the current initiatives, next steps, and I know there's no timeline at the moment for V2, right? Or for sure this year, or
I would say this quarter,
or
the
this
next quarter. Yeah.
Then we also have to begin to. So since we know what it's going to look like in parallel, we could actually start planning out maybe some work on Marquez to be prepared for this.
Well, thank you very much, Willy, Peter, and Harel, and we'll see you next month.
Yeah, I think, next month, maybe we can come up with a more, so we have the discussion here, we could come up with a light roadmap on maybe what we want to achieve this year when we start moving over to V2 and supporting.
All right, sounds good. See you then, everyone.